The new live-action adaptation of Snow White has finally arrived, and the result is, at the very least, controversial. After numerous reshoots and script changes, the film presents a clear contrast between two approaches. On one side, the essence of the 1937 animated classic, and on the other, a modernization attempt that divides opinions. But did this blend work? Did the film manage to capture the magic of the original animation, or did it get lost in its own contradictions? Let's break down the key aspects of this production and analyze what worked and what went very wrong. From the beginning, it's clear that Snow White is not a cohesive film. It tries to balance two very different approaches, one that respects the essence of the 1937 animation, and another that seeks to modernize the protagonist for a contemporary audience. The problem is that these two visions clash, resulting in an unstable narrative with no clear identity. The first version of the film is almost faithful to Disney's original material. There are moments when the magical atmosphere of the classic emerges, bringing familiar elements that could appeal to both longtime fans and a new generation. However, the second version abandons this magic in favor of turning Snow White into an empowered heroine, but without emotional depth. This attempt to update the character falls short in execution. The story tries to convince us that Snow White is a strong and determined leader, but there is no real development to support this. The script simply tells us she is powerful, without showing that strength in an organic way within the narrative. As a result, the character becomes generic and lacks charisma, losing the charm and delicacy that made the original version so iconic. This division between two styles makes for a frustrating experience. At times, the film seems promising, evoking nostalgia for the classic, only to immediately break that immersion with dialogues and situations that feel out of place. This issue isn't unique to Snow White. We've seen something similar happen in other Disney productions. In recent years, Disney has followed a concerning pattern of reshoots and last-minute changes in its films. Captain America: Brave New World and Daredevil: Born Again went through similar processes, with entire scenes being scrapped and reshot after negative audience reactions. In the case of Snow White, rumors suggest that the production faced numerous changes along the way, trying to adjust the film's tone to avoid controversy. This creates a clear problem. When a studio doesn't have a clear vision from the start and keeps changing its own film multiple times, the result is often an inconsistent final product. Reshoots can be useful for fixing minor issues, but when they are used to rewrite fundamental parts of the story, they leave behind a trail of incoherence in the narrative. This brings us to one of the film's biggest flaws: its technical execution. Beyond its narrative shortcomings, Snow White suffers from technical problems that directly impact the audience's immersion. The direction and editing result in scenes that feel artificial, with an aesthetic that often resembles a poorly lit stage play. The visual effects, which should help create a convincing fantasy world, fail in several instances. CGI-generated environments look generic and lifeless, and the lighting makes everything appear excessively artificial. Instead of immersing us in a fairy tale, the film constantly reminds us that we are watching something filled with digital alterations. The performances are also affected by this approach. Rachel Zegler, as Snow White, delivers an exaggerated performance, feeling more like a character from a children's commercial than a captivating protagonist. Her acting is influenced by a direction that aims for an artificially sweet version of the character, preventing any real nuance or genuine moments of emotion. Meanwhile, Gal Gadot's portrayal of the evil queen follows a theatrical tone that doesn't always work. At times, her villainy is convincing, but in others, she feels more like a caricature than a truly menacing antagonist. The excessive theatricality and lack of balance between acting styles contribute to the audience's disconnection from the story. But one of the film's biggest issues lies in how it alters one of the core elements of the original tale: the conflict between the evil queen and Snow White. In the 1937 classic, the story revolves around the evil queen's jealousy of Snow White's beauty. This simple yet effective rivalry drives the narrative and establishes the real danger for the protagonist. In the live-action version, this motivation is diluted into a plot involving revenge and power struggles, removing the essence of the original conflict. This change seems to have been made to avoid discussions about beauty standards, but it ends up having the opposite effect. It weakens the story and creates a villain with generic motivations. This leads to an even bigger problem: the way the film tries to insert contemporary messages without integrating them naturally into the narrative. One of the most controversial aspects of the film, its attempt to include modern themes in a forced manner. This has happened in other Disney adaptations, such as Peter Pan and Wendy, where discussions about female leadership were inserted without much context within the plot. In Snow White, the message about independence and female empowerment is constantly repeated, becoming redundant and ineffective. The protagonist no longer needs a growth arc or real challenges. She starts the story already being strong and determined, without this being convincingly shown. Additionally, the film alters the concept of beauty, creating a major contradiction with the original storyline. In the animated film, Snow White's beauty is essential to justify the evil queen's jealousy. In the live-action version, this idea is weakened, and even the magic mirror adopts a new subjective criterion to define who is the fairest of them all. This change weakens one of the fairy tale's core themes and leaves the story without a solid emotional foundation. Looking at the film structure, we can divide it into three main parts: the beginning and the end. These are the most problematic sections, where the modern discourse on leadership and independence is emphasized in a forced manner. These scenes try to reframe Snow White as a revolutionary figure, but only result in stiff, uninspiring dialogue. The middle. This is where the film most closely resembles the 1937 classic, incorporating familiar elements and a more magical atmosphere. Interestingly, if the beginning and end were removed, and only the middle remained, the story would feel much more coherent and aligned with the original version. In the end, Snow White is a film that tries to please everyone, but ends up satisfying no one. It has some inspired moments, but the technical and narrative flaws outweigh its strengths. The attempt to modernize the story results in a fragmented and disconnected experience, while the exaggerated direction hinders the performances. Despite this, there are a few positives, such as the expanded relationship between the evil queen and Snow White's father, which adds some depth to the plot. However, these small strengths are not enough to make up for the poor creative decisions that impact the film as a whole. Ultimately, Disney continues to follow a concerning pattern: structural changes, reshoots, and attempts to rewrite classic stories to avoid controversy. This raises a bigger question: do these alterations actually benefit the stories being told? Or are we witnessing a phase where the studio prioritizes messaging over well-crafted narratives? Now, I want to hear your opinion. Do you think Disney is on the right track with these changes? Or do you prefer the classic versions? Leave your comment below.